Hello students, welcome to this class on Budget 2019. The budget, has different ingredients. As an annual financial statement of the government, the budget shows the government's financial engagement with the economy. What are the different ingredients of the government budget? It contains a lot of schemes and programs. It contains different policy statements and reform measures. But the most important part of the government budget is the expenditure and receipt statement. In this session, we are focusing on the financial side of the budget 2019 that contains expenditure and receipts of the government. And for that, we have to go through the budget at a glance statement provided by the finance minister along with the budget statement. Here the table shows the budget at a glance statement for 2019 budget. And this table, as we have said, shows the profile of the government's budget for 2019 in the sense that it contains all expenditure and all receipts of the government. And there are 17 entries you can see from the table extending from item number 1 to 17. While you are understanding the budget, this table may be boring sometimes if you are not good at data, but at the same time it is not difficult. We need not by heart any figures, just go through them. Understand the interconnections and try to get the meaning of what these figures say. So that is the best method to understand the budget. Most of the skilled finance ministers who had good ideas about budget making were not experts in economics. When they can handle it, we can also do it if we put a minimal level of effort. And in this table, as we have seen, there are 17 entries. And we will start with 2 entries, item number 8 and item number 9. Item number 8 shows total receipts of the government for 2019, whereas item number 9 shows total expenditure. You can see that both are equal. That means item number 8 is equal to item number 9, or total expenditure will be equal to total receipts. That is our beginning point. So in any budget, total expenditure will be equal to total receipts. The total expenditure and total receipts shows the size of the government budget. And what is the size of the government budget for 2019? It is rupees 27,84,200 crores. Remember, the size of the government budget for 2019 is 27,84,200 crores rupees. That shows the total expenditure as well as the total receipts of the government for the year 2019-20. Thus, we have covered 2 entries, item number 8 and item number 9, that shows total receipts and total expenditure. That is our beginning. Actually, this budget at a glance statements gives us a platform for us to understand the government budget 2019. And now we are coming to the first item in this table, that is revenue receipts. The revenue receipts for 2019 is rupees 19,77,693 crores. Revenue receipts are coming from 2 fronts, tax revenue and non-tax revenue. Item number 2 shows tax revenue, 3 shows non-tax revenue. You can see the amount of taxes that the government is going to get for 2019-20. That is around 17 lakh crores rupees. Remember, the total tax revenue for the government for 2019-20 will be, it is estimated to be around 17 lakh crores rupees out of a total receipts of 27.8 lakh crores rupees. That is the status or the contribution of tax revenue to government's total receipts. And coming to the details of the tax revenue, you can see that the central government has different taxes, including the GST, the corporate income tax, the personal income tax, union excise duties, and customs duties. The table shown here indicate the size of the government's different tax revenues. We can see the share of different taxes of the central government for 2019, the absolute amount of the tax revenues as well as the relative shares in the all tax receipts. Okay, and the first one is the goods and service tax. Understandably, the contribution of goods and service tax for 2019-20 under the 2019 budget is 7,61,200 crores rupees. Remember, 7,61,200 crores rupees, and its contribution is around 29.8 or 30% of the government's total tax receipts. And the second tax revenue for the center for 2019 will be the corporate income tax. And the contribution of corporate income tax is estimated to be around 7,60,000 rupees. So you please observe the difference between the goods and service tax share and the corporate income tax share. And regarding their percentage contribution, you know that the goods and service tax contribution is 29.8%, whereas that of the corporate income tax is 29.7%. And you can see the close fight between the goods and service tax and the corporate income tax to become the largest tax revenue for the central government. And which one is the largest one? Okay, if you are going through the revised estimate for 2018-19, that is the current year, you can see that the corporate income tax collection was 6,71,000 crores rupees, whereas the GST collection was just 6,43,900 crores. That means, as per the revised estimate for 2018-19, the largest tax revenue was the corporate income tax, whereas the goods and service tax was the second one. And the third tax revenue for the central government is the personal income tax. Its contribution is 6,20,000 crores rupees, and its share is 24.3%. And the fourth tax revenue for the center is the union excise duties. The union excise duty revenue collection will be around 2,59,000 crores rupees, whereas the customs duty, it is estimated to be around 1,45,000 crores rupees. So those are the contributions or the shares of different taxes of the central government. These are the 5 important taxes. The 6th tax revenue is the capital gains tax. Coming to the non-tax revenues, we can see that non-tax revenue for the year 2019-20 is estimated to be around 2,72,647 crores rupees, and that is less significant in the entire receipts of the central government as well as in the revenue receipts of the central government. And which are the most important non-tax revenues for the central government? The most important non-tax revenues for the central government are the profits from public sector enterprises, revenue from currency, coinage and mint, and income from social and economic services. So these 3 are the most important non-tax revenues for the central government. Remember, their contribution is not that much significant. And we are concluding about the revenue receipts, and we can easily see that revenue receipts significantly contributes to the central government's total receipts. The revenue receipts amounts to 71% of the government's total receipts. The remaining 29% is contributed by capital receipts. That shows the importance of revenue receipts in the central government's budget. Now we are coming to item number 4, that shows capital receipts of the government for 2019-20. And look at the table. What is the size of the capital receipts? It is just around 8,06,507 crores rupees out of the government's total receipts of 27,84,200 rupees. So the capital receipts of relatively small size compared to the revenue receipts. And there are 3 components for capital receipts. The recoveries of loan, item number 5, other receipts, item number 6, that means disinvestment, that is very important. Disinvestment target for 2019-20 is 90,000 crores rupees. And the 7th one, an important one, that shows borrowing and other liabilities of the government, that is around 7,03,999 crores rupees for 2019-20. So these are the 3 components of capital receipts. And before going to the details of capital receipts, we should understand that the government budget is divided into 2 components, revenue budget and capital budget. All expenditure and receipts are categorized under revenue budget and capital budget. So there is revenue expenditure and revenue receipts. Similarly, there is capital expenditure and capital receipts. The flowchart here shows the 2 components of the government's budget, revenue budget and capital budget. The revenue budget has revenue expenditure and revenue receipts, whereas the capital budget has capital expenditure and capital receipts. Remember, for if you are understanding budget 2019-20 or any other budget, you have to understand the classification of revenue expenditure, revenue receipts, and capital expenditure and capital receipts. Going through the table, you can see that item number 1 shows revenue receipts, whereas item number 10 shows revenue expenditure. On the other side, item number 4 shows capital receipts, whereas item number 13 shows capital expenditure. So the budget's expenditure and receipts are divided into 2 under the revenue budget and the capital budget. What is the nature of revenue budget? Basically, revenue budget is current nature. Okay, that means expenses or expenditure in the revenue budget are made for the running of the government activities or the government machinery. receipts are also related to the day-to-day functioning of the government. On the other hand, capital budget includes the asset creating expenditures and capital receipts, including borrowing and other receipts of the government. Now we are coming to capital receipts. And we saw that capital receipts are of three types. Item number 5, 6 and 7 shows these three different components. So remember, capital receipts are of three types: recoveries of loan, other receipts, and borrowing and other liabilities. So of the capital receipts, the most important one is the borrowing and other liabilities. That is around 7,03,999 crores rupees, or around 25% of the government's total receipts. Remember, borrowing is around 25% of the total government receipts, or the government is financing 25% of its expenditure through borrowing. That is the message of item number 7. And look at item number 6, that is other receipts. That shows disinvestment. The government is getting around 90,000 crores rupees through selling of shares of public sector enterprises. That is shown as other receipts, item number 6. Whereas recoveries of loan is contributing only insignificantly. Remember the contribution of the three components of the capital receipts. The most important one is the borrowings. We have to see the significance of borrowing in 2019-20 budget. Remember, borrowing is the largest receipt item in the capital budget. Okay, capital budget is around 8 lakh crores rupees. Okay, out of that 7 lakh crores rupees, around 85% comes through borrowing. And borrowing is the major balancing item in the government budget. Borrowing is made to make total expenditure equal to total receipts. Technically, borrowing is equal to fiscal deficit, and higher borrowings means higher fiscal deficit. You can see that under item number 7, the amount is 7,03,999 crores rupees. The same amount is there under item number 16, that is fiscal deficit. Okay, that is also 7,03,999 crores rupees. So fiscal deficit is equal to borrowing in the Indian budget context. Now we are coming to disinvestment, and disinvestment is shown under item number 6. Okay, there is the other receipts that shows disinvestment, and disinvestment for 2019-20 is around 90,000 crores rupees. Remember, 90,000 crores rupees. So we saw two types of receipts: revenue receipts and capital receipts. Okay, extending from item number 1 to item number 7. All these receipts, revenue receipts plus capital receipts, gives us the total receipts. That is item number 8. Item number 8 is equal to 1 plus 4. So total receipts is equal to revenue receipts plus capital receipts, and that is 27,84,200 crores rupees. Remember, total receipts will be equal to total expenditure. So the total receipts and total expenditure shows the size of government's budget. Okay, what is the size of government budget for 2019-20? It is 27,84,200 crores rupees. Okay, now we are coming to the expenditure side of the 2019 budget. You can see it from the table. The expenditure side extends from item number 9, that is total expenditure, to item number 13, that is total capital expenditure. Actually, item number 9, that is total expenditure, comprises of total revenue expenditure, that is shown under item number 10, and total capital expenditure, that is shown under item number 13. So the size of total expenditure is 27,84,200 crores rupees. On the expenditure side also, the government budget is divided into two: revenue expenditure and capital expenditure. And we are starting with the revenue expenditure. Revenue expenditure are made for the running of the government machinery, and they are considered as unproductive because they are not creating any assets. Okay, and from the budget angle for 2019-20 as well as for the previous budget as well, we can see the size of revenue expenditure. Revenue expenditure is around 88% of the government's total expenditure. Okay, you will just look into the table. Revenue expenditure is 24,47,907 crores rupees in a budget of 27,84,200 crores rupees. So of the total expenditure, revenue expenditure share is 88%. That shows the significance and the size of revenue expenditure. That means around 88% of the government expenditure is used by the government to run its own machinery or to finance its own day-to-day activities. In the table, item number 10 shows revenue expenditure, and one or two components of the revenue expenditure are also shown in the budget at a glance statement. Item number 11 shows interest payment. Okay, you can see that the budget at a glance statement shows only one type of revenue expenditure, that is interest payment, shown under item number 11. What is its size? 6,65,061 crores rupees. Remember, in the total expenditure size of around 27 lakh crores rupees, 27 lakh 84,000 crores rupees, the interest payment amounts to 6,65,061 crores rupees. That is around 24% of the government's total expenditure. So 24% of the government's total expenditure is made for repaying interest. That shows the debt implications of the government budget. When the government is borrowing too much, it produces interest payment, and interest payment is the largest revenue expenditure item in India's budget. Okay, that is around 24% of the entire government expenditure, shown under item number 11. Now we are coming to see the major revenue expenditure items of the government. We saw that the revenue expenditures are incurred to finance day-to-day functioning of the government or day-to-day activities of the government, and it constitutes to around 88% of the government's total expenditure. And which are the most important revenue expenditure items? The interest payment, subsidies, defense, salaries, pension, etc. The table here shows the shares of different types of revenue expenditure. We can see that interest payment amounts to 6.65 lakh crores rupees, or it is around 24%, 23.8% of the government's total expenditure. Next comes subsidies, that is around 3.34 lakh crores rupees subsidies, including food subsidies, fertilizer subsidies, interest subsidies, petroleum subsidies, etc. That is around 3.34 lakh crores rupees, or 12% of the government total expenditure. Okay, and third is the defense expenditure. Fourth is the pension. Okay, so these are the different types of revenue expenditures and their respective shares in the total government expenditure. Next is capital expenditure. Capital expenditure denotes future asset creating type of expenditure made by the government. Okay, and the capital expenditure comprises of expenditure made by the government to acquire assets, building, machineries, subscription of share capital of public sector enterprises, etc., loans to the states, union territories, foreign governments, and other entities. Capital expenditure for 2019 budget is around 3,36,293 crores rupees. You can see its size. It is very small. It is just around 12% of the government's total expenditure. We saw that the other component, that is revenue expenditure, is around 88% of the government's total expenditure. Capital expenditure is used to finance productive purposes, So small size of capital expenditure is a demerit of the government's budget, and that is a trend as well. For the last so many years, capital expenditure remains small. Now we are coming to item number 14, one of the most important indicator of the government's fiscal health, that is revenue deficit. So we are coming to item number 14. We are skipping item number 12 for the time being. We will explain it later. And item number 12 is grants in aid for the creation of capital asset. Okay, we will see it later. So far in this budget at a glance statement, we have seen different types of entries extending from item number 1 to item number 11. Okay, we are skipping item number 12 and we are coming to item number 14, that is revenue deficit. And revenue deficit is one of the important indicators of the government's fiscal health. What is revenue deficit? Revenue deficit is excess of revenue expenditure over revenue receipts. So it shows the extent to which revenue expenditure is above the revenue receipts, or government's revenue receipts like tax revenues are not enough to meet its revenue expenditure, including subsidies, interest payments, salaries, defense, etc. Practically, it shows that the government doesn't have enough own revenue to make its day-to-day operations. So that is the implication of revenue deficit. Okay. So item number 14 shows revenue deficit. What is the size of revenue deficit for 2019 budget? It is around 4,70,214 crores rupees or 2.2% of the GDP. That is the size of revenue deficit for 2019 budget. And what are the implications of this revenue deficit? It means the government has to depend upon capital receipts like borrowings and disinvestment to finance its day-to-day operation. That is an indirect extreme meaning of revenue deficit. We know that if there is a deficit in one part of the budget, that is revenue budget, you have to create an equal surplus in the capital budget. So a deficit in the revenue budget will be financed through a surplus in the capital budget. Or in other words, capital budget surplus through items like borrowing should be made to fill the revenue deficit. Okay, that is the important meaning or implication of the revenue deficit. The revenue deficit in the government budget, that is shown in item number 14, that is around 2.2% of the GDP for 2019. And this revenue deficit tells the story of fiscal ill health in the government's budget. Suppose that if there is a revenue deficit this year, okay, that means the government has to borrow to fill that revenue deficit. And that borrowing will result in interest payment. Remember, interest payment is a part of revenue expenditure. It is the largest component of revenue expenditure now. And increasing borrowing, increasing interest payment expenditure, again it will produce revenue deficit in the next year, or it will widen the revenue deficit. Okay, and this explains the vicious circle of debt for the government. Okay, you cannot escape from revenue deficit once it happened. Okay, and revenue deficit in India happened continuously from 1979 onwards. And in this way, interest payment became the largest expenditure item for the government by 1990. Even now, interest payment is the largest expenditure item for the central government. Now we are coming to item number 15, that is effective revenue deficit. What is effective revenue deficit? It is indicated as 14 minus 12, and you have to look into item number 12, that is grants in aid for the creation of capital asset. What is grants in aid for the creation of capital asset? That item number 12, it shows that some part of the revenue expenditures are really productive, or they are used to create capital asset. So since they are productive, they have to be reduced from revenue deficit, okay, to estimate the effective revenue deficit. So the effective revenue deficit is estimated by reducing or deducting capital asset creating type of revenue expenditure from the revenue deficit. So effective revenue deficit is equal to 14 minus 12. 12 we have already discussed, that is grants in aid for the creation of capital asset, or those revenue expenditure which are asset creating in nature. Next is fiscal deficit, the most popular indicator about government's fiscal health. That is shown under item number 16. Fiscal deficit is 7,03,999 crores rupees, or it is around 3.4% of the GDP for 2019. And what is fiscal deficit? Fiscal deficit is equal to total expenditure minus total receipts except borrowing. Once more, fiscal deficit is equal to total expenditure minus total receipts except borrowing. So actually it indicates borrowing of the government. Remember, when you are deducting total receipts except borrowing from total expenditure, you can get fiscal deficit. Since total expenditure is equal to total receipts, fiscal deficit will be equal to borrowing, and this you can see from the table. You have to watch item number 16, that is fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit is 7,03,999 crores rupees, and you have to observe item number 7, that is borrowing. Borrowing is equal to 7,03,999 crores rupees, or in other ways, fiscal deficit is equal to borrowings. Item number 16 is equal to item number 7. Now we are coming to the last entry of our budget at a glance statement, item number 17, or primary deficit. So we have covered all the 16 entries. The last one is item number 17, and that is not very much significant, and the item is called primary deficit. You can get primary deficit by reducing interest payment from fiscal deficit, or primary deficit is equal to fiscal deficit minus interest payment. And what actually primary deficit shows? It shows the non-interest expenditure of the government that is met out of borrowing. Remember, how much of the non-interest expenditure is met through borrowing? That is what the primary deficit shows. Okay, primary deficit for 2019 budget is 38,938 crores rupees, or that is around 0.2% of the GDP. Remember, primary deficit is around 0.2% of the GDP. The fiscal deficit is around 3.4% of the GDP that we have not mentioned earlier. Remember, the size of fiscal deficit for 2019 budget is 3.4% of the GDP. That is very important. For the timing, we are not covering about the various fiscal dimensions of this budget. And the fiscal deficit shows how much of the total expenditure is met by the government or financed by the government through borrowing. Okay, and fiscal deficit is around, or borrowing is around 25% of the government's total receipts, or 25% of the government's expenditure of 27,84,000 crores rupees. Okay, remember, 25% of the government's total expenditure is financed out of borrowing. That is the meaning of the fiscal deficit. Okay. Hello students, now we are coming back to the original budget at a glance statement. Okay, the budget at a glance statement we have seen so far throughout our explanation are shorter versions, shorter versions that shows only budget for 2019-20. Okay, actually the budget at a glance statement of the government gives budget figures for 3 years. Okay, remember, budget figures for 3 years. The most important budget component will be the budget estimate for the coming financial year. Okay, the financial year that starts from April 1st onwards, or the budget estimate for 2019-20, which we have discussed exhaustively throughout our session. Okay, then there is the revised estimate about the current year. Okay, that means revised estimate for the current financial year of 2018-19. The current financial year is going on, it has not been completed. Similarly, there will be a budget estimate statement for the current year as well. This is just a reproduction, remember, reproduction of the last year's budget. And the next one is the actual statement for the last completed financial year. The last completed financial year is 2017-18. So the actual statement for 2017-18 will be also there. Okay, so budget is 3 in 1. There will be 3 years budget, a budget estimate for the next year, a revised estimate for the current year, and an actual statement for the last year, or the year, the last completed financial year. That's all about this session. We were discussing about the financial side of the government budget. Don't forget that this was a technical part of our budget class. So you may have some difficulties as the topic demands a strong learning curve. But surely you can get benefit out of this session after a few revision. Hope you will get the best out of this class. Thanks and best wishes.